Okay, guys, let's get started with the lecture today. Today we will talk about social influence. And before I get to that, let me remind you that actually this first take-home test is coming up. The first take-home test will be posted on Blackboard as advertised on the 14th of October at 4 p.m. That's a Sunday. That's the date when it's going to be online. And then you have 72 hours to complete this take-home test. On Thursday, I will do a quick demonstration that you actually see where you have to click and and how the whole thing looks like. But essentially, it is all through Blackboard under assessment. You will be prompted questions, sometimes stupid questions, about the readings that you guys had to do up till now. And the whole point of this exercise is for you to catch up on the readings. Yeah? So some of the questions are really stupid questions about, what is this number, blah, 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 or something like that. Yeah? It's really just for you to go down into the readings. You have 72 hours to catch up on that. Yeah? Any questions about this at the moment? Yeah?
Can you pause the test?
Yes. Yeah, you can pause. So there's 72 hours in total. That's the whole point of it. You can get a question and think, I don't know that answer. Let's go and do that reading. And then you do it, and then you know the answer. Why. But you cannot go back. Yeah? And questions will most likely be randomized as well. Right? So in a random order, so it could be that you get different questions. Yeah? Any other questions? Yeah? Okay, so on Thursday I will do a quick demonstration that you see how it looks like, yeah, but not too much about this. Okay, so let's get started about the topic today. So this is what I brought with me. First of all, I want to talk about social influence in general, and then I want to home in on two mile landmark studies in this field. One is called the Medical Innovation Study. It's a study by Paul Lazarsfeld and others, and it's really about this idea of how social influence actually matters, how networks matter for the adoption of what individuals do. Yeah, and we're going to put that in this whole context of this micro-macro link, but here it's about how macro-level phenomena affect micro-level individual behavior. And then the second study is called the Cultural Market Study. It's a more recent study, but it's equally a milestone landmark study by Duncan Watts and Steve Salganik and Peter Dodds. They published actually 2 papers in Science about that. You had to read one book chapter about this, but it's actually based on 2 science papers that those guys wrote. So it's actually pretty cool stuff. And the reason why that was such a milestone at the time is because they showed how, with the experiments, how networks actually can have a macro level implication. So then we take it up again from the micro to the macro level. Yeah? And then we will talk about unpredictability and about inequality. These are sort of like the things, but this is a very nice designed study as well. But before we do that, I want to do a little experiment with you guys. So in order to do that, I'm going to show you a little video. So please watch very carefully. There will be questions about this afterwards. Okay, so it's a little experiment. Actually, it works like magic. I think it's pretty cool. I've seen a couple of you guys yawning. Yeah. Some of you multiple times. Actually, whenever I teach that afterwards, I have to yawn for the rest of the day. Yeah. This is, but this is nothing specific to us. Actually, this totally works in public settings. If you want to give this a little try, go somewhere in the arts cafe and have like a yawn, that kind of an obvious yawn. Chances are, and actually it works in 50% of the cases, that then somebody in the immediate environment, in the immediate neighborhood, will start yawning as well. It's hilarious. Actually, the same thing works with laughing as well. You've seen, I don't know, sometimes you can have these hysterical laughing attacks where somebody starts laughing and then other people start laughing at the end. You don't even know what you're laughing about anymore. It's just you're laughing because everybody else is laughing. But with yawning, that's actually one of those really weird things that we actually don't really understand. Believe it or not, it's really contested why people yawn. We don't really know it. There's no evolutionary necessity for it. It's very weird. Some people argue it's about empathy in a way, and some studies actually showed that, some serious studies showed that dogs are more likely to yawn when their owner yawns than when a random person yawns. Right? The other study is that, so if you want to read up on this, there's more about yawning. There's actually quite a literature on yawning. There's more that shows it's actually age-related, so this works more in younger populations. Oh, there was another yawn. There you go. Actually, me just talking about yawning, and another yawn, just repeating the word yawning makes you yawn. Yeah. And that's kind of crazy when we think about it, because what the fuck is going on? There's nothing that is being spread. There's no virus or anything, but still we do observe that yawning is socially contagious. Actually, it almost acts like a disease. It spreads from one to the other. And actually we do have a couple of social phenomena that kind of operate like that. And this is sort of where the whole, I don't know, for me, which is why I study social networks so much, because I think they're fundamental to our human and social life. This is the fabric on which we act and on which we behave. And so many things are connected with each other, and so many of our behaviors work on that network structure where we are dependent on what the people around us do us, but in fact we're not really aware of that. And that's sort of like my little mission against, I don't know, quite a big chunk of sociology where people actually study individuals in isolation from each other. I don't understand that. Sorry. For me, this is much more based on reality that when we can think about how things are connected. As it turns out, there's not just yawning, but actually we can show that the same holds for obesity. There are studies that show that obesity is contagious. When your friends are obese, you're more likely to become obese as well. We know the same thing with crime. When your friends kind of commit crime, you're more likely to commit crime. Sadly, the same thing holds for suicide. Yeah. There's a contagion effect, as documented. Divorce, you're more likely to get divorced when your friends get divorced. In fact, even with having babies, yeah. Smoking, and even getting a job is contagious. Right? So that's very, very strange. So now I have a little bit of an exercise for you guys, and I want you to be aware of this phenomena a little more. So why don't we just take 2 minutes where in small little groups you guys talk about other social phenomena where you think that behave like a social contagion like this, where behavior spreads even though there is no physical virus or nothing physical being transmitted from one person to the other. Yeah, so 2 minutes and then we talk about it briefly. Okay, guys, let's stop here. Actually, I heard a couple of very interesting examples, like, for example, how stuff is being posted on Facebook, and then you start liking it because others liked it. There's a whole other dimension to it, which is highly problematic, but we're hardly aware of, is like how we observe our world in a biased way, but we're not really aware of it, right? And actually, in fact, I do a little bit of research on this area about how we experience our world in a distorted way and what the importance of network structure is in that context. But there you kind of see it. I don't know, you start liking it because others already liked it. You think, oh, yeah, somebody's liked it, so it can't be that bad, right? Or somebody else mentioned the thing of taking notes when other people around you take notes. And I was bringing up the notion of what is called rational imitation, because they are actually, it might make sense. You might think, oh, maybe I missed something. Maybe the person next to me actually got something or has more knowledge than I have. And maybe because of that, that is important, even though right now I don't really think it is important. Yeah? But the point of this exercise was that you realize about how much of our social life, where social networks, but social influence in particular, matter, right? And how they guide our life, sometimes in ways that we are hardly aware of. One of the fun little experiments I always do, I was just 6 months in Switzerland. In Switzerland, people follow the rules, and so they love their order in a way. And there's a red traffic light, and everybody stops. And I'm, being the sociologist living in Ireland, I just walk over it. Yeah. But then what you see is actually then other people follow. So even there, you can see these kind of effects happening. Actually, I was thinking about doing that in Ireland, but it's actually really problematic to find something where actually people follow orders to begin with. So I would have loved to do this experiment with you, but I didn't come up with one, where actually that order is being adhered in the first instance, and then norm-breaking behavior actually is a social influence phenomenon. But anyway, so let's put this a little bit in more terms. So social influence, we're talking about people influencing each other. A definition that I have here now is social influence. We can define it as change in an individual's thoughts, feelings, attitudes, or behaviors that result from interaction with another individual or group. That's a very generic definition that we have here. And now what I want to do with you, I want to put that in this context of this micro-macro schema that we talked about last week. Remember, we have like macro-level phenomena. We want to connect them with each other, we want to explain them. That's what analytic sociology is about. But we need to think about individuals. Only individuals act. Individuals are embedded in social context. They do something, and then, it transforms and it aggregates. So let's fill that a little bit with context. So we have social networks, right? We have some structure. You are embedded in networks that you're not aware of. You don't even see this structure, because you only have your little fish view on that whole thing. But believe me, there is a structure behind it. And that's the kind of stuff that I study all the time, and where most of my research is about that structure of that pattern and that substrate on which social action occurs. And that kind of affects micro-level behavior, individuals, some action occurs, and then we have some implications following from that. And what I'm doing now I have like two studies, these two landmark studies, the medical innovation study and the cultural market studies. They focus on two aspects within that context. The first one, the medical innovation study, looks at how social networks actually affect individuals and then how they do something. Yeah? In this case, it's the adoption of prescribing of certain drugs of, like GPs. It's actually about the introduction of a new antibiotic back in the days, and they figured out that actually it really matters whether your friends already prescribed that or not as a doctor, and then you started prescribing it as well, right? So there's some evidence, and there's lots of evidence, but this is a landmark study in that regard about how networks matter for the adoption, how social influence plays a role then for the adoption of a certain behavior. And then in the second half, I want to get to this point and this is the cultural market studies, where we look at how, when individuals behave in a certain way, how that actually then aggregates up again to macro level phenomena like inequality and unpredictability. Yeah? So we have these two studies, the medical innovation study, which basically says that social networks shape social influence. And then we have the cultural market studies, that social influence leads to macro level implications, for example, inequality or unpredictability. Okay, so let me get started with the first study that I want to talk about. The medical innovation study. As I said, this is a landmark study for a couple of reasons. I don't know, just the scale of it at the time, but then also, like this solid empirical research is not as old as you might think. People only started around that time to be very serious about their research methods. How do they collect data? Like have evidence, not just theorizing stuff. A lot of sociologists do that. They just theorize stuff. They just make stuff up, and they call it a theory. And it's important. I think it's very important. But at the end, everybody can make stuff up. Yeah, I don't know. I can have lots of brain farts during the day, but so what? Yeah. So I really believe in having brain farts and combining them with solid evidence, that you have actually good support for your theory or your idea that you're having. So the study was unique in that sense. So it kind of paved the way for later research. So a study by James Coleman, you already heard the guy, Elio Katz and Herbert Menzel, and they focus on this. Essentially what they did, they looked at the prescription, as I said, of a new antibiotic drug. Right? Back in the days, again, something that's hard to imagine, a world without antibiotics. But those days, antibiotics were the new thing, and there are different kinds of antibiotics. And there was a new antibiotic coming onto the market that was clearly better than the other ones. And in this case, it was like a study that was actually funded by Pfizer at the time that produced this new antibiotic tetracycline, which is still used today. And they looked at the adoption of that. Yeah. So they wanted to know what makes GPs prescribe this drug. And the idea was that social influence matters here. And that's where the study is also like a landmark study. It's like the beginning, the first hard evidence that we have for social influence. So they collected data in the 1950s, just after the introduction of this new drug. They interviewed doctors in 4 Illinois cities, and in innovative design, they sampled prescription records in the first 3 days of the month. And the way they did that, they actually went to the pharmacists and they asked them how many times did somebody bring a prescription of tetracycline. So they had some solid evidence for that, right? For the prescription of drugs. So they wanted to know, like, is there an effect? Is there like a social influence with regard to the prescription of the drugs? And they went through the prescriptions. And on these prescriptions, they looked at the date, like when was the drug prescribed? When did the doctor start prescribing this new drug? And then they could actually track it down when kind of after the release of these new drugs, which doctor started using these clearly advantageous drugs over some others. So far, so good. So what Coleman and others also did, then they kind of went to those GPs. I think there were around 400 of them in these 4 cities. They talked to all of them, or to most of them, and they asked them, who are your friends among your colleagues? They asked them, with whom do you often discuss your cases, and to whom do you often turn for advice on or information? These things are what we nowadays would call network generators. There are different kind of questions for different types of relationships. Yeah? But one was really friendship. The other one was sort of like discussion. And the third one was advice. There are different kinds of relationships. They often overlap, but they do not necessarily have to overlap. Right? And then they kind of use that information, and that's what we call sociometric data. These are basically network data that they collected, like who is friends with whom, amongst those 400 GPs in the area. And then they kind of combined that with the information about when those guys started to prescribe those drugs. It's kind of funny, people kind of keep yawning, but that's always the problem with this lecture. kind of goes on. Believe me, even after this lecture, you might still yawn. Yeah. So anyway, so this is sort of like their main finding. Let me quickly walk you through that, what that means. This is a graph, very simple. At the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with simple graphs. I'm a big fan of simple graphs. If you can express something in a simple way, express it in a simple way. It's actually much harder to express something in a simple way than in a complicated way. So on the one axis, on the what we call the x-axis, it's this one, right? We have the months after release of this drug. Here they gave it a fake name, but it was tetracycline. That's basically the time that passes. And on the y-axis, that's the axis going upwards. That's like the cumulative proportion of doctors who prescribe this drug. Like this would be one when everybody prescribes that drug. So you see, after 17 months, everybody, I don't know, most people turn to this new antibiotic because it's better than the alternatives that were available so far. Less side effects, same effect, actually better effect, and so on. Right? So this is, you see, like the adoption. That's sort of what this maps out. But now you see three different lines. So what do these three different lines stand for? Well, now they kind of actually separated on the friendship information these 400 doctors into three different groups. They separated them in one group with no friends among those other 400 doctors. Second group with one or two friends among those other 400 doctors. And the third group with individuals that have 3 or more friends among those other 400 doctors in the area. And what you see here now, basically, the adoption is faster among those guys that are connected. The curve goes higher up, faster. Like when you have 3 or more friends, you are kind of more likely to kind of have adopted the drug after, let's say, 8 months than if you would have had no friends among those other 400 doctors. So that's sort of evidence that that suggests that actually the network matters here. That social influence matters here because people, that's the argument, because people are embedded in these networks. They hear from their other friends who are also doctors that they heard about this new drug. It's great, it does the job, and then they start adopting it themselves. Okay. So that was the evidence for social influence being prevalent here. So the doctors who were mentioned by their colleagues as friend, advisor, or discussion partner, here they repeated that graph. I just showed it to you for the friendship. Prescribed the new drug on average earlier than those who were named by few or none of their colleagues. Results also showed that networks mattered more at the beginning of the adoption phase. If you would actually track down who actually prescribed the drug, there the networks mattered more than later on. Kind of makes sense. At the end, everybody adopted it anyway. Right? While at first, these channels are more important, so the importance of these channels changes. And they also showed, I didn't show you the results, but that's like in another paper, the different kinds of network ties mattered at different points in time. At first, the discussion and advice network mattered. Later on, the friendship network mattered more. Doctors were also more influenced by others in uncertain situations, in treatments whose effects are unclear. So basically, when they didn't really, when there was an uncertain situation, then they were even more likely to get influenced by other people. Sort of makes sense, like, I don't know, if you have your own idea, if you're very certain about what you're doing, then the world around you can do whatever it wants. If you're kind of less certain about what you're doing, then you're more susceptible to social influence. So that's sort of like the evidence how network structure kind of leads to micro-level behavior and the adoption of a certain behavior, in this case, the prescription of this drug. Let me now move on and move to the second study that I want to talk about today. It's like the cultural market study. And that's this reading that you guys had to do. This one is basically just a summary book chapter of a couple of 2 science papers and a couple of other publications. So you can also read the science paper if you want. It's actually a good exercise. Go and read the science paper. It's actually pretty cool. And often these are easy to understand. This one should be understandable for you. And the point now is that this is an example about how, when individuals behave in a certain way, how that then leads to a certain macro-level phenomenon. In this case, we're talking about inequality and unpredictability. Okay, let's backtrack a little bit. What we do observe in cultural markets, cultural markets, I don't know, it's books, movies, music, these kind of things. That's like what we refer to as cultural markets. But what we do observe often is that things are really difficult to predict what's going to be successful or not. So you all know the Harry Potter books, hugely successful, one of the most successful books ever, But actually it took, I think, 8 publishing houses who rejected the book in the first instance. They didn't want to publish it. They thought, that's bullshit, it's never going to fly. But these young wizards and stuff and witches, and who wants to read that? Yeah? So, of course, in retrospect, those publishing houses, they were pretty upset about having passed the opportunity. Yeah? But it tells us something about, hang on, actually, it's really difficult to predict the success in cultural markets. So actually, it was 7 publishing houses that rejected the series originally, but then at the end of the day, it was sold collectively over 300 million times. Actually, it still keeps going, and I don't know, I saw other editions recently. Another example that you might be familiar with, so the Star Wars franchise. It's a hugely successful franchise. It's like, whoa, multi-billion dollars business at the moment, yeah? But again, at the beginning, people thought, this is a fail. It's not going to work. It almost didn't get produced. It just, I don't know, a couple of individuals believed in it, but actually the industry thought at the time there were no big Star Wars universe, space movies and science fiction in a way. People thought, this is not going to fly. You're just going to waste your money on this. Turned out to be a huge success. Actually, sometimes you see the opposite, and that's not what really annoys me. I like these Marvel movies and stuff like that, DC Universe and shit. Yeah. But then you see once in a while those movies where you think, God, guys, you ruined it. Yeah. I don't know. I barely walk out of a movie, but having seen the Batman versus the Superman, after half an hour I had to go. Yeah. This just ruined it for me. It's like one of the 2 of the best franchises that I loved up to that moment. They just dumped it. Yeah. And then you wonder, they spent millions, hundreds of millions of dollars on producing movies like that. And there are other movies that are examples for that, where huge amount of money just goes down the drain. Yeah? There are lots of examples. And when you talk with folks in the movie industry, they say, well, to be honest, we don't know what's going to be successful. It's like a guessing game. It's really like, I don't know, rolling a dice a little bit. Yeah? It's really, really hard. In retrospect, of course, you can always come up with stories, but at that moment, it's really, really hard to tell. Or another example, I don't know, you might remember this show, American Idol. It's like a huge success all over the world. By now, it luckily died out. God, finally. Yeah. But that show also has been rejected by 3 television stations, and then it was like a money maker for 15 years afterwards for the TV station that finally adopted it. So long story short, things are incredibly difficult to predict in cultural markets. And now this paper that I'm talking about actually has an answer for that. It says the reason for that is because of social influence. Social influence happens at the micro level. People are influenced by others, and that leads to a macro level phenomena, which is first inequality, we'll talk about that in a second, but then also about unpredictability. It's really hard to make predictions about that. How can that be? Okay, so now let's talk about the Music Lab studies by Sal Garnick, Peter Dodds, and Duncan Watts, pioneers in that field. It was very innovative what they did at the time. This is like the mid-2000s. Basically what they did, nowadays it's hard to imagine, but back in the days, there was no Spotify or anything like that. There was hardly an iTunes, something like that. Right? So what they did, they created a website where people could go to and listen for free to some music. It was music of unknown artists. Then they could rate the song, they give it a score, stuff that you now do, thumbs up, thumbs down, I don't know, 5 stars, 0 stars, yeah. Score from 0 to 100, whatnot. And then people could download the song for free. And they had this website, and it's like a milestone also in terms that they actually pulled off such a large social experiment. Now we can use experiments to study society. And I think they become very powerful when we do that. We can use experiments not just to study individual behavior, but to study collective outcomes. And that's what they did. So they controlled the information that the participants would receive about the behaviors and the and the downloads of other people. Now you see the blueprint of an experimental design. It's always the same. You have like something that is like the control condition. People went to this website. They listened to the song, music that they could download. They could see it there. There was, I don't know, I think they had 150 songs there that people could listen. They carefully selected them from unknown artists so that nobody would know them. And then people had to rate. Yeah? So far, so good. Give the song a score. And now the experimental condition comes into play. So we have like a control group, and then we have a treatment group where we administer a treatment. What does that mean? That means we do something, and then we know the difference between these two groups must be because of what we did to this one group, but we didn't do it to the other. That's what we call the treatment condition, where something is being done to those guys, but not to the others. And then you see a difference between these two, and then it's pretty cool because this is like the gold standard of getting towards causality. That's how we can get to knowing what is actually causing what, right? Because if then there is a difference, the difference must be, assuming that otherwise people are assigned at random, then the difference must be due to what we did to the people in the control group that we didn't do to the people in the control, that we did to the people in the treatment condition, but we didn't do it to the people in the control condition. What was the treatment here? Well, the treatment was social influence. They kind of told people about the ratings of other people. Yeah? So imagine like half of the people went to this website and they just saw those songs, listened to it and gave it a rating. But the other half of the people went to the same website, but instead of just seeing the songs, they actually also saw the ratings that other people gave to that song. That's the treatment condition. And they did that. They did another nice thing. And that's where unpredictability comes into play. They didn't just funnel people off into one control and one treatment condition, but they actually funneled people off into 8 different treatment conditions. And it was exactly the same treatment, but they only saw the information about the other people that lived in that world. Yeah? So that's actually how it looked like. So actually people were split up. Yeah? Half of them were just directly sent to the control group, and the other half, they were split up into one of those other 8 groups, and in these other 8 groups, they all got the information about the people that were in that particular group. Yeah? The ratings that people gave in that particular group. That's the design. And now we have 2 experiments that they conducted in that regard. First one is what they call, the weak influence condition, and the second one, the strong influence condition. They distinguish the difference between these two is that in the weak one, they basically imagine you went to this website and there was a random order of the songs, but there was the ratings of the songs visible at the end of that song. But there was no sorting of those songs. While in the strong influence condition, not only were the ratings of other people visible, but those songs were also ordered according to that. It's like, the highest rated song was at the top, while the lowest rated song was at the bottom. It's just in both cases, there's information about others conveyed, but in the strong influence condition, it's made very prevalent. Yeah? It's made sure, okay, well, actually, it's really at the top here. Yeah? You get the message. Other people really like that song. So what were the findings? So now I'm going to talk you through their findings. Well, first of all, you see now different graphs for that. You see a rank market share and the probability for listening. And what you see is different dots. White dots are the independent, it's like the control condition, like people that didn't have any information about others. And you see the gray dots. These are individuals, or actually in this case, refer to the songs where people had information about others, how others liked that song. And what you see is that in the social influence condition, songs that were ranked higher were also listened more, right? So once you kind of got, for exactly the same song, once you kind of had the information that others liked that song, you were more likely to listen to that song. That's what this graph here shows. It just really shows that if we would not have given that information, people would have, the chances for listening to a song would have been the same, pretty much. Okay, so that's the first one. But now we're actually interested in these 2 macro level outcomes, right? I mentioned inequality and unpredictability. Okay, let's get to that. So the first one, they argue, and that's quite a contribution, saying that social influence leads to inequality. What is inequality? Well, inequality is really about how unequally distributed are certain things. It could be all sorts of things. It could be wealth, it could be intelligence, it could be, likes, it could be whatever. Right? It's really, inequality does not exist if you all have the same number. Equality does exist if you all have different numbers. Yeah? Or actually it exists if there are different ways of measuring that. And now the Gini coefficient is the most popular way of measuring inequality. Yeah? It's a measure for getting that inequality. When everybody has the same, everybody's the same. Let's say we would get all scores from 0 to 100. If we would all get the score of 50, the Gini coefficient would be 0. Yeah, on the right-hand side, you see a graph about how you calculate that. It's about the cumulative distribution. You just add up all the values and just line people up, right, and kind of stack them on the top of each other. That's the cumulative share of people with, I don't know, in this case, what the income is. Yeah? So you just stack them on the top of each other. And if everybody is the same, that kind of stacking up should follow one line, a diagonal. That means everybody has the same value on whatever that is. So if you would all have the score 50, then the distribution would follow that line, and the Gini coefficient would be 0. While in contrast, the Gini coefficient is 1. The Gini coefficient ranges from 0 to 1. If let's, in our little example with scores from 0 to 100, if all of you would have a score of 0 and one person has a score of 100, yeah, then the cumulative distribution would be nothing happens, nothing happens, nothing happens, nothing happens, until the last person shows up, and then kind of we go up in the cumulative distribution, and then you will basically cover this whole area. Then this, what is called the Lorentz curve, would be like really going down and then going up. Yeah? And the Gini coefficient is defined graphically a little bit as the area the Lorentz curve covers of the whole thing. Yeah? But let's not worry too much about that. It's really just a measure for how unequally distributed are things. It's 0 when everybody is the same. It's 1 when one person really sticks out. Yeah. Okay, so now they kind of use this measure with these ratings. So now you see these 8 different worlds. So you see like 8 dark gray bars. They represent these 8 different worlds in the social influence condition, and they have one light gray bar. That's the one world in the control condition. Let's talk about the control condition first. Basically, there they take each of those 100 songs, 150 songs, I don't know how many they were, got a rating, and if people would have given all the same rating to the same songs, that Gini coefficient would have been 0. While if one song would have been like the top song and a huge amount of points, and everybody else would have gotten 0 or 1 point, this Gini coefficient would have been 1. And that's sort of now what is depicted on the y-axis, what you see over there. And the story here now is, when you compare, particularly on the strong influence condition experiment, the second experiment at the bottom, you see this difference between the social influence group and the independent group. So when people could hear about what others liked, they started jumping on that too. They also got lots of points to those who already got lots of points, and that kind of increases the variance between everybody. That's the point. We have a whole other lecture about that. It's called success breeds success, or the Matthew effect, that those who are already successful, they become even more successful. Yeah? Sometimes also call it cumulative advantage in sociology. And that mechanism leads to an inequality in the points. That number one song, because it's number one, lots of more other people listen to it, and because more people listen to it, they're more likely to make it number one as well. Right? Compared to a scenario where that song would not have been more likely to be listened to. So that's sort of how social influence leads to inequality at the macro level. Okay, so that's the one thing. The second thing that they have, or the second macro level implication, so to speak, is that social influence leads to unpredictability. Unpredictability. And again, they're not making these things up, but they actually have solid evidence for that. Yeah? So don't forget about the equations here. As I really just put it up there for you guys, those who actually do want to understand it. But the story is very, very simple. They have these 8 different worlds, right? Actually, genius design that they didn't just funnel people into one social influence world, but in 8 different ones. Yeah? And there was no information across those worlds, but really only just information within those worlds. Now, the idea with unpredictability is that, I don't know, if social influence actually matters here, and then you have these dynamics that kick something off, and then one song becomes more successful and so on and so forth, then it's actually a pretty random process how this occurs. Sometimes just random differences, and sometimes actually no real differences, make one song popular, and then because of that, bang, that guy skyrockets, right? If you kind of take that idea and kind of think maybe there's nothing fundamental about these songs, maybe it's really about the dynamics that matter here, then it could have been equally another song that suddenly skyrockets off. Right? If the world would have been somehow different, somehow, I don't know, somebody else would have ranked one song high to begin with, then that song would have been the number one at the end of the day. While in another world, in another life, I don't know, it could have been another song that takes it off. You know? That's scary to think about, because often in sociology we don't like this idea that randomness drives things. But I think it's fascinating. Randomness is most often, I don't know, not just a problem, but the solution to our problems, in a way. Or in societal context, it can explain so much. You know? It's like really fascinating, and I don't know, much more research needs to be done in that regard. And what they did, they applied that idea to those 8 different worlds. You know? And now they have this measure, and you see this measure on this one side. Essentially what this is that this measure is high when songs got very different ratings across those 8 different worlds, right? If it would be all about the subjective quality or, I don't know, objective quality of a song, then, I don't know, the song is good, it should be good in all of those worlds. If a song is bad, it should be bad in all of those worlds, right? But actually, that's exactly what they measure here. And this unpredictability is high when the difference across those worlds in the ratings for a song is high. That means people don't agree over those different worlds, what is the best and what is the worst song. That was the story, right? And then they did the same thing for our independent conditions. Actually, I have paid attention to this so far. Actually, I had to rethink that today as well. They only have like one world where they're the people who are in the independent conditions. But none of them is connected to anybody, right? So actually, when you read the science paper there, it's described a little more, that they split people in half. They create 2 artificial worlds. Nobody talked with each other, and they applied the Selin algorithm, the same formula that you have here, to measure like how do people in these artificially created halves agree on the rating on a song. Now we are ready to interpret this graph, because now what you see is that in our control conditions, like the independence, this unpredictability score is lower compared to in the social influence condition, where people hear about what others like. So basically, when people hear about what others like and how others rate it, it didn't just cause these dynamics unfolding, but actually in these 8 different worlds where history could have played out in a very different way, it actually led to huge disagreement. People didn't agree on what is like this song. And that's kind of a sign for actually it's not really about the objective quality of those songs, but it is about the underlying dynamics that play out here. And then we're talking about social influence. So that's essentially like how social influence can lead to not just to inequality, but also to unpredictability. So these are the 2 findings of this study, that hearing about others and in the context of the macro level schema, you see how individuals behave in a certain way. But that kind of is not just aggregated in a way, because people influence each other, it transforms, and we have macro level phenomena like inequality and unpredictability. Summarize it, they showed that social influence at the micro level leads to both inequality and unpredictability at the macro level. Yeah? But we come back to this study when we talk about Matthew effects, success rates, success dynamics, because they actually did really cool stuff as well, where they artificially changed those ratings. So the people rated a song very high, but then they kind of made a cut and kind of rated the worst rating. And actually then what happens is then actually the next people also rated it worse, even though other people kind of rated it high. So that's that's a story for another day. So on Thursday, we will talk first about self-fulfilling prophecies. And for that, you have the reading by Merton. And all the readings, including this reading, is relevant for the take-home test. Yeah? See you on Thursday.